yours I ever read was The Age of Missing Information. And I was reading this and I just thought, A, it was just a beautiful book, but B, it was just such a great idea. You take 24 hours of cable television, 80 channels? Is that what?
100 channels.
100 channels, 24 hours, and you record it. So you've got 2,400 hours of television to watch. So you watch that, and then you spend 24 hours on the top of a mountain. Okay, so what did 2,400 hours of television teach you? And what did 24 hours on top of the mountain teach you?
Well, there's a lot of stories in the book, a lot of things in the book. I mean, a very interesting project to kind of, on one level it was a very horrible project, I must say. A year of watching television every day, all day long as your job is just about as much fun as it sounds like. And one of the best results was that we were able then to get rid of the TV without feeling like intellectual snob, I'd given it its due. There were a lot of lessons that came through, and the book is filled with kind of observations about time and sufficiency and things. But if you boil down everything that came through that coaxial cable for that 24-hour period, sort of day in the life of the information age, I think the most powerful message that came through all the time, and it's really the message of a consumer society of which TV was the most profound anchor. The message is, you're the most important thing on earth. You're the center of the universe. This bud's for you, and which is we've come to describe this idea as human nature. Okay? After 50 or 60 years of conditioning in a highly consumer society. And anytime anybody proposes anything that sounds at all contrary to that, that would be impossible, that goes against human nature. Clearly it's a part of your nature, right? This sort of selfish, self-absorbed part. But for most of human history, other things have been at the center of people's idea of their identity, their relationship with the natural world, with God, with each other, with the community, the tribe, have been how people define themselves. And so it was very interesting to think about our culture as one in which most of the taboos and limitations that come with being part of something larger than you have now been effectively cast aside, and we've been taught to think of ourselves in units of one very powerfully. And of course, when you're outside, no great news here. The kind of overwhelming feeling is precisely the opposite. You're small, and everything else is large, but in a nice way, in a beautiful way. Everything seems sufficient. You don't sit by the pond and think, boy, that pond would be better if there were more rocks in it. It's just, there it is. So it's probably a good thing to have done.
What was the influence of Wendell Berry on your writing?
Oh, pretty total. I've always been at a loss to again, no theologian, but always been at a loss to describe, the operation of the Holy Spirit other than as that force which puts one book instead of another in your hand at a particular moment. I read Wendell Berry as I was leaving the New Yorker and moving to the Wilderness, and some combination of those two things, Wendell Berry and the Wilderness, were what launched me and wrote my first book, The End of Nature. He's the I think he's the greatest writer at work in the English language, and the greatest moral philosopher that our country has. And for a very long long time. He was a voice crying very much in the wilderness, but it's great fun that he's lived long enough to see some of what he's been talking about for a long time come to pass. You know, when he started talking about the need for local food systems and rebuilding our agriculture in 1970, there were maybe a handful, literal handful of farmers markets left in the country. Now, for the last 15 years, it's been the fastest growing part of our food economy. Sales going up 12 or 15% a year. Without Lindleberry, that wouldn't have happened. So I'm very glad he's lived long enough to see that it has.
Yeah, I want to talk about End of Nature, the book you wrote, because more than 20 years ago, you started saying things about climate change and global warming, and I don't recall seeing many other people than you talking about that in the popular media. And now, it just seems in the last 5 or 6 years, it seems like it's become a thing. Is that fairly gratifying? From your perspective, saying, oh, people are finally starting to pay attention to this?
It would have been nice had it happened rather more quickly. I mean, I was 27 when I wrote The End of Nature, and my view as a 27-year-old would be that it was going to be that the way that change would happen would be I would write a book, people would read about it, and then we would do what we needed to do to deal with the biggest problem that we had faced. And, in fact, actually a lot of people read it. It was in, 24 languages or something, and on all the bestseller lists. But oddly enough, it didn't actually change the entire trajectory of the world's economic system.
Yeah, a Harvard guy would think that way.
So it's been very good to have more allies emerging. But the problem is, the reason is that because we've done nothing about the biggest problem we've ever faced, it's become the damage is no longer speculative the way it was 20 years ago when I was writing The End of Nature. The damage is now exceedingly real and growing worse with each passing week, and hence there's lots of people happily finally starting to write and think about it. Now we still need to actually do something about it.
You've been accused of being just this doom and gloom guy for more than 20 years, and there's a whole groundswell of folks who say all this stuff that you cite, it's just in fact, I think the quote is the biggest hoax, the global warming, the biggest hoax on the public. And they look back to like 1973, that limits to growth report, said that looked like the end of the world, and that didn't turn out to be true. It's just all one big.
The odd part is it didn't. I just went back and reread all the limits to growth stuff for this new book of mine that's coming out in a week or two. It's amazing to go back and read that set of reports and see, in fact, how very close to the mark they were. A team of Australian academics just put out a long paper examining all the assumptions that the limits to growth people had made about what was going to happen, and they were unbelievably prescient. If you read, I have a piece in the current issue of Scientific American, and it accompanies a piece by a number of scientists talking not only about carbon in the atmosphere, but about 8 other tipping points, nitrogen systems, long list of things. And in each of them, we're either over or very, very near what seem to be the profound tipping points. With carbon, we're clearly way too much in the atmosphere.